In this guide, I want to share everything with you guys I know about melodies. So I created this little melody in which I will explain you 7 concepts about melodies. Concept number 1 is the timbre, or the sound of your instrument. What synthesis you use. I guess most of you would agree with me that you wouldn't put in the same notes for a lead or a pad. But the same goes for lead presets. They also have differences in them. So for example, you may have a more aggressive or a more psychedelic sound, and depending on that, you might want to change your melody in a way that it really brings out those properties of the synthesis. Think about this. Think about what the synthesis wants to tell you. What's kind of like, what is it creating? What kind of emotion is it creating in your body, in your head? And you want to bring that down in the melody. So the next thing I want to talk with you guys is the pitch domain. So in this melody, for example, you can see I fold the scale to E phrygian here. And in this melody, all the notes are on the scale. It's allowed to also use notes off the scale. You can do that. Then I actually do that sometimes if I want to create more tension intentionally, then you can go off the scale as well. Or if you use embellishments, for example, and other things, you can go off the scale. But in general, it's a good idea to have a lot of notes on the scale, or you can even, like in this melody, have all notes on the scale. So that's something you should consider. Also considering when you're starting your track to choose a scale which really suits the mood you want to create. So I really like the Phrygian scale, and it's widely used in Psytrance, or the minor scale. But if you're looking for maybe something more happy, then you could use the major scale. And there's many other scales or modes actually, like Lydian, Mixolydian, Locrian, also in between. And you can also mix those in the track. So if your track is in Phrygian, you can also go on another scale as well in the track. So that said, this will kind of like make the mood of your melody, like kind of like the overall mood. And then out of the scale, because the scale is bigger, we select like a subset of notes. And this subset will even define the mood even more, because we are limiting ourselves to certain notes, which first gives us some structure in the melody, and also it limits the intervals, and the intervals basically between the notes. So let's say we have here the notes A, F, and E, and B. So we have B, A, F, E. So we have 4 notes only, and in different octaves. By setting those 4 notes, we also basically limit our choice of intervals, which is really important because, for example, like if you have a perfect fifth interval, like 7 semitones, it will sound more resolved, more happy. If you have a tritone, like 6 semitones, it sounds more evil. It's like the devil's interval. Or if you have those 1 semitone steps, they give a lot of tension. Also, it's important if you look at the intervals in which direction. So just play a little bit around with this. So my suggestion is, before you start the melody, maybe look for a few tones you like in the scale you have chosen, and then look for some intervals you like, and you can use that for the design of your melody. Another thing which I think is a little bit less important in Psytrance, but it's important, is harmonies. So whenever you have a chord beneath your melody, and a chord can also be only one note of a chord. So for example, if you have a pad going in your root note, then all the notes from the melody will have a relation to that chord, because then you have like an implied chord. So basically, let's say we have this pad here in E, then this would also influence the relationship from our notes. And the same goes also for the bass line. So this is also an important thing to consider. Now we had only the pitch information, but if we bring in the time information, then we see the next important point in melodies. It's the contour. So what's kind of like the movement in our melody? Imagine that you take like a thick, fat adding marker and you follow your melody. It doesn't have any shape. So for example, here, if we follow it, we can see it moves downwards. Okay, there's like a little jump, but if you have your fat text marker, you would basically go like this, like this, like this. Here we have a more sudden thing, which actually creates tension. So that's the thing. If we would have it here, it would be even easier to follow. But that's a point I will come later to and explain you in more detail. But imagine now we follow it like this, or maybe we could even follow it like this, like here in the middle, if we don't want to mark it exactly at the notes. And then we follow here along, and we can see it more or less has a very defined shape. So it's not all scattered notes. It has some structure in it. And one more thing about contours also, if you have like a highest note, it can give some kind of like peak moment in that melody, which really lifts the melody. And it shouldn't be overused then. It's more like a mountain peak. Mountain peak, you also only have one peak, or maybe like 2 peaks on a mountain. And if you like this video so far, then please hit the thumbs up and the subscribe button. And also my current EP Mars Attacks is out there. If you haven't got a copy yet, then grab a copy and support this channel and me and my music. And if you want to know how I created this track, you will find videos, the making of this track, in my members area. If you subscribe for the middle or highest tier, then you can see those videos and you can follow me along and really see my process of how I do tracks. The next thing when we come from the contour is steps, leaps, and the overall rhythm. So let's first go to the wording. So steps, I define everything which is like a half step or a whole step, so 1 or 2 semitones, and a leap is everything a little bit bigger. The thing is, usually leaps give you like tension, surprise, and stepwise motion is easier to follow. Like imagine like you have stairs in your house and you just go step by step. It's very easy, but if you have to jump like a meter, suddenly it will get more difficult. And that's the same in the melody. If you have too many jumps, and I have actually a lot of jumps in here, so it's maybe not the best example for that, then it's a little bit harder to follow for the listener, but it also makes it more interesting. So your job is to find the right balance between those steps and leaps. And now we come to rhythm, because rhythm is basically where you place your notes, and the effect rhythm has is dramatic on your melody. So first, what can make rhythm? You have, for example, different note lengths. Let's say we would have like 8 notes and 16 notes, then it makes a difference where we place the 16s and where we place the 8 notes. And the same also goes for pitch. So we have notes which sound or pitch, and as I said, like intervals between pitches. So we have things which sound more tense. So for example, like those here, or the leaps. And we have things which are less tense. So in general, like going to the tonic of our track is note-wise less tense, and like more stepwise motions also less tense. Here's a little bit of mix because we have like this one interval here. But in general, you could just like listen to it and see, is this something which sounds more natural, more like pleasing, or more tense? I think we all can kind of like feel that, even if you don't have like a lot of musical training. It really depends where you place those. So we have certain slots which are stronger. So for example, this is the strongest slot in your melodies, like the one which goes with the kick here. So the first one, so if we look at one bar here, then the next ones are the next kicks here, here, and here. Then we have the ones in the offbeat here in the middle, so those here, and then we have the other positions. And depending if you place something very tense on a strong position, it will have like a stronger weight in your melody, and that way the whole melody will sound more tense. As if you would place it in a section where it's not so important, where it doesn't have so much weight. Music is structure. In a melody, we're looking for repetition, but also for variation. It's always the balance. It's always the balance with everything. So for example, we have motifs. Motifs are little things you can copy across your melody. You can find again. So for example, this one, if I move this, we also have this here, or we have it already here. So you can already see it's there. And also this little thing we have like a lot. You have here, here, here. So basically you could think of having modules in your melody, kind of like little encapsulated things you repeat. And if you repeat those motifs, so for example, we have here one bar and we have here the next bar, and the bars look slightly different here in the end, but in general we could say like this is basically a whole phrase. So a phrase is then if you bring together like a lot of motifs, and you have another like big block. So you could basically say you should make your memory. We could also say this makes your We could also say this makes your melody more memorizable, because you have those little building blocks which kind of like build your whole melody together, and they are repeating, so we already know them when we hear them again. And as I already have mentioned, it's all about variation and balance. So in the end, you don't want to follow everything super strict. As I mentioned, you can also use like maybe off-scale notes, or you can break up patterns. So for example, you could say this is also like a motif here, but here I broke it up like a little bit, so we do not go always the same like this here. We go one time down here to the G to give it like a little bit of variation so that it doesn't sound too predictable. By the way, I don't know if you have noticed, but now as I copied it, do you see that this motif here also repeats here? So if we go down here, we're landing again here. So that's kind of like a bonus motif here, which I put in that melody. But anyways, coming back to variation, so we want to have something which follows a structure, but once in a while we want to break up the structure, or we want to use a scale, but once in a while we may step out of that to give a little bit of extra tension. We want to make like stepwise motions, but also we want to break out and create some leaps. So it's all about that. Just think, when you created your melody, does it sound too boring? Then you may need to step out a little bit more out of this kind of like design things. Or does it sound too weird? Doesn't really follow any structure? Then maybe you need to bring in more structure. So that's the main point, I guess, about music in general. So there's so many rules, and there's so many rules to break, and it's just about the timing of when to break them, so that you kind of like get that balance and variation in. And last but not least is the context. So where is your melody playing in? I usually do a brainstorming before, so I do the context thing basically later in combining like different things which really work together. But let's say you're creating the melody from scratch in a part of your track, then you really need to pay attention what is already playing there. Is there something already occupying strong spaces there? Is there something creating like a harmony, as I said, like a pad? So always take in consideration what's the context, and also about the pitch. Does something play in the very high domain and I want to add something which is maybe a little bit lower? Or is it the other way around? So that's all things you need to consider. You really need to pay attention to what is already playing, because sometimes you can also do little games, like whatever, like the one melody gives like a question here and you answer it with the other melody. Or you design your melody and you notice you already have a melody, then you may want to design this as a counter melody. So there's a lot of things to consider. I hope this didn't confuse you, but help you to make some decisions. And yeah, of course, in the end, you won't sit to the scratch board with all those little details I told you and then design your melody in your head like Beethoven or some other artists. But it may help you when you do a melody and you have that knowledge intentionally in kind of like in your subconsciousness, then it may help you to make better decisions. Or if you already finished a melody but you don't know why it sucks or isn't that way you want to have it, then this may help you to have a new insight in your melody and redesign it a little bit more thoughtful and more planned in the end. I hope you enjoyed this little video, and if you liked it, then please hit the thumbs up and hit the subscribe button if you haven't already. Also, my new EP Mars Attacks is out there right now, and if you want to support me and my channel, then please get a copy at Beatport. I will put a link down here. And if you are part of my members area, then you can see the making of this track, which is currently at the date of this video, I think number 7 in the release charts, and I'm sure it will go number 3 with your help. So please push it, and see you next time.